Hi everyone, welcome. What we have here are a pair of African nightcrawler worm bins. ANC is my abbreviation for African nightcrawler. These systems were both launched on the same day, 122 days ago. And over that time, we've periodically checked in on them. So on this occasion, it's been 11 days since the last check-in. And on that day, 11 was kind of an interesting theme because 11 days ago the system was 111 days old, and on that day it just happened to be getting its 11th feeding, so the number of the day was kind of like 1 basically. A prevalence of 111s. I even had another system the other day that I was preparing to feed where I thought I had the same kind of trifecta or whatever the the word is when these things line up this way, where there too the system was reaching 111 days old. It had been 11, the 11-day pause between feedings was coming up, but on that day the system was to receive its 10th feeding, not its 11th. So let's peek into the very damp feeding zone to see how these little guys did with their last feeding. I remember I grabbed a handful of my prepared bedding, sprinkled it down into the cavity that we dug out here to create a feeding zone for them, plopped in an assortment of different fruits and veggies for them, stuff from my freezer, and I believe I topped it off with perhaps even a little more bedding. And then to cap it all off, after the system had been thoroughly aerated, inspected, whatever, leveled off again, just prior to putting it away, we left another little dose of bedding out here on the surface, all these leaves, which at this point I usually like to blend it in, and then I like to just blend it all in and then bring in replacement top covering leafy matter. To me, I don't know, this doesn't seem like a huge worm ball, but all the worms in here seem nice and plump and healthy and rich dark colors, pretty lively. Just putting them out in the bright lights is going to invoke a response. But if the worms are lethargic, unhealthy, they're not going to react very quickly. They're just going to kind of sit there and take it. But these worms, yeah, they seem nice and lively and stuff. Good looking worm bins. Good looking worms. So before I forget, something I noticed when we were bringing the systems over from the bench, over from the shelf here to the bench, was that I thought I saw a few flying insects, and then I thought I saw some again. So before I forget, I had even put this out in front of me, kind of front and center, to make sure I apply a little bit of this mosquito dunks, which at this point is gone. I'm going to have to grind up another one of those donut-shaped cookies, but yeah. But I think we're better off dealing with the matter at hand and not letting ourselves space out and forget to deal with it. Well, I think I see little bits of what appears to be leftover stuff. I think the assortment of food that they got last time was a mishmash of different things, as is today's feeding. I could see bits of tomato and lettuce, pepper cores, and the other thing I've got a great deal of right here is an overflowing container of coffee that I need to be careful with, but I do want to be generous with the coffee to get them working on this stuff. So let's make a little space into which today's feeding can go. I think, yeah, here. I'm reminded now that each system did receive an entire pepper, and this was the system that received the jalapeno pepper. And the reason that it's still sitting here as leftovers is not because the worms are avoiding it due to its spicy flavor, because flavor isn't really a thing for worms. They're a somewhat more simple creature than us, so I'm sure we'll see that break down a little further soon. But I believe that the reason it survived so far was because it was a whole jalapeno pepper without any of its skin breached or anything like that. So I'm not even sure how it ended up as worm food. Perhaps it was kind of dried out and stuff, but it did seem to me like perhaps the juicy innards of it had not yet even been exposed. I believe delaying its breakdown process. So I oftentimes have various things that I'd like to try to break down in the bedding category. So anything like paper products would all fit into that category. So I've got these paper towels that need to go, and then I had a whole bunch of coffee filters too, of which we will traditionally set aside 2, which we can use as feeding zone indicators or replacement feeding zone indicators, in which case we would take the old ones if we felt it was time to retire them, or perhaps it's more a promotion rather than a retirement, right? Giving a coffee filter the opportunity to be right down there in the action in the feeding zone with the worms rather than just sitting out on the surface. And then these 4 will go 2 and 2. I like the idea of wrapping the foods that I have for these little guys into little bundles, kind of forcing them to have to go past the bedding type materials and gobble some of it up as they go in pursuit of their next meal. So that's part of the reason I like using these coffee filters this way, assuming there's time to allow for it. Alright. Oh boy. Just that you need like an extra set of hands to hold everything here. Alright. It doesn't need to be a work of art either. I think you get the idea. And then I've also got my prepared bedding over here. It's a mix of shredded paper and cardboard with leaves mixed in, and it's kept nice and damp. So I was hoping to be really generous today with the bedding, not only giving them some of these soiled paper products and used paper products, but also sprinkling the feeding zone with even more as a little bonus. Because these are African night crawlers after all. I did have to do like a double take when I was observing earlier how their color was nice and dark, and then I was like, well, is that really just an indicator of a really healthy red worm, or is that particular red worm a type that's typically just a little bit darker in color like an African night crawler? And I think that's probably the explanation. I always like the way my worm chow sort of blends in there with the coffee. And then even the slightly brighter, lighter colored grit, the pulverized eggshell, looks pretty nice too. And let's not forget, we want it to be nice and generous with the bedding today, so we're going to build up the feeding zone even more by dropping in a handful, almost taking us up to the level basically. So what we'll do is we'll go up to the outer edges, and while we're aerating and blending in all this nice leafy matter that had been resting on the surface, we'll also at the same time be aerating and fluffing things up a little bit to hopefully level everything off nicely. And boy, oh boy, my first impression when I bought these systems over from the bench was that perhaps leaving the plastic covers on a little bit loosely to allow for the system to breathe, possibly kick off some of what seemed like excess moisture, might have been working, because somehow they just didn't seem quite as heavy as the systems where I would normally be looking to allow for some evaporation and drying. But there's still a great deal of moisture in here, so I believe that going back on with the covers the way we found them when we first got in here, basically pulling the edges of the plastic bag covering in to allow for a little bit of moisture to escape around the edges is a good way to go. And just because it's uncovered and it's exposed to the air, I did notice, even before removing the plastic covers, was that those sections weren't even getting all that dry. In fact, what I thought I noticed was those sections that were exposed to the air had just tons of fresh worm castings deposited there. So that was kind of neat to see. It almost seemed like if we came back here in a much, much longer period of time than just the 11 days that has elapsed since the last check-in, that we would, you know, just find like an entire top surface coated with all fresh, brand new castings, which would be pretty nice too. So that to me looks like a really nice setup. And let's see, did I space out on feeding zone indicators? I believe I might have, but you know what? Just so happens that I've got a whole stash of them over here. So we need not worry. I've got what I wanted to put down here to show us where we last fed, not so much because I'm concerned about not finding my way back. Pretty sure we would find our way back to the feeding zone again if we wanted to, but it's just a little tradition, kind of a casual, informal way to mark where we last fed, using coffee filters that would just otherwise keep piling up, piling up, piling up. And I suppose I could just treat them like any other paper product that I throw into the shredder and include in my prepared bedding. But they're kind of this one recurring object that is consistent, so why not use it for something that's pretty consistent, which is incorporating it into the feeding zone as the indicator for you. And you know what? Before we cover up the second container over there, I'm going to use some of these nice clean leaves to return any of this stuff that has stuck to my gloves back down into the worm bins before we part ways, because hey, that's where it belongs, right? Down in the bin, not on my glove, not down in the drain of the sink. All right, everyone, that was it for our 122-day-old African nightcrawler systems. Now, getting feeding 12 after an 11-day interval between feedings, and it seemed like a very good interval because they pretty much did away with almost everything. I saw some pepper leftovers, but not much. Oh, there's another insect. All right, well, let's keep our fingers crossed, and I gotta make more BTI, a little bit more mosquito dunks powder. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.